For years, Trey Sesler was just a quiet face on the internet, a guy with shaggy hair, a soft voice, and an awkward charm that made his viewers feel like they knew him. He wasn't famous, not in the traditional sense, but to a niche group of online fans, he was something of a pioneer. Before YouTube was crowded with influencers, sponsorships, and monetized mayhem, there was Trey Eric Sesler. He called himself Mr. Anime. A high school kid from Waller, Texas, Trey carved out a corner of the internet where he could talk about the things he loved: Japanese animation, camera tricks, horror movies, and eventually guns. At first glance, his channel was harmless, just another teenager with a video camera and a head full of fandoms. But that's the thing about masks. Sometimes they're not worn to deceive. Sometimes they're just easier than being seen. Trey was never the most polished creator. His lighting was shaky. His edits were rough. His sets were often just cluttered rooms in his family's suburban home. But none of that mattered. His sincerity came through. He was passionate, even endearing. He would hold up a DVD copy of a forgotten anime series and dive into a review with boyish enthusiasm. He joked. He rambled. He laughed at his own awkward delivery. Fans loved it, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And then something changed. It was subtle at first. A few rants. A few short films that leaned a little too hard into violence. A joke about wanting to kill someone after watching a bad episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Viewers brushed it off as dark humor. A lot of YouTubers did that back then. But then the guns started showing up. Trey would show off pistols on camera, blow up furniture in his backyard, review anime one day, then test firearms the next. He became obsessed with power. Some of his videos began to lose their playfulness. His voice was flatter, his eyes darker. The line between fiction and reality, between skits and real rage, was beginning to blur. And in one of his final videos, he said something that still sends chills down the spines of those who watched it. "Mr. Anime is planning something," he said, and he smiled. That video was later deleted, but the damage was done. The seed was planted. No one could have guessed what he meant by something. Not his subscribers, not his friends, not even his family, who had unknowingly played supporting roles in his amateur horror films, who stood just inches from him in front of the same lens that would soon capture something far worse. Trey Eric Sesler was building a story, but it wasn't a screenplay. It wasn't fiction. It was real, and it was already written. In 2006, at just 17 years old, Trey created his channel, Lindcap Productions. The name sounded professional, like he was aiming for something bigger than bedroom videos. Maybe one day he'd go to film school. Maybe he'd direct horror movies. His early uploads were a mix of anime reviews, fake news segments, skits, and short films. He cast his older brother, Mark, in many of them. They laughed. They bickered. Sometimes, Trey would pretend to kill Mark in a scene, then cut to black. The performances were rough but earnest. His audience didn't mind. That was part of the charm. But behind the scenes, Trey was spiraling. Most of his fans didn't know about his social isolation, the emotional numbness, the growing fixation with mass shootings, with serial killers, with death. They didn't see the forums he read, the notebooks he filled with violent fantasies, the research into school shooters, the weapon tests. They only saw the surface. The guy with the hoodie in front of a webcam, talking about anime. They didn't notice the shadows growing just beyond the frame. And if they did, they looked away. In one video, Trey sets up a handgun and casually blows up an old couch. In another, he references his growing depression, masked behind a half-smile and a pair of dark sunglasses. "I haven't been sleeping too well," he says, almost like a joke. Shortness of breath, back pain. I think it's pneumothorax. He's 22, but his eyes look older, tired. Something's unraveling, and no one, not even those closest to him, seems to see it clearly. Trey begins pulling away. He takes fewer calls. responds to fewer messages, but he keeps uploading. Because that camera, it's the only place he can still feel something. It's the only place he still has control. His videos now are harder to follow, less scripted, more erratic, and then in February of 2012, he posts something that seems almost benign, unless you know what came next. It's a short vlog. He announces he's taking a break from YouTube. A few weeks off, maybe more. He smiles, thanks his subscribers, says things are going well. But the title of the video? Mr. Anime is planning something. And with that, he disappears. When Trey uploads again, it's something else entirely. A job update. A sign of hope. I found a full-time job in film, he says. Still doing the YouTube thing, though. Still doing anime reviews. But it's the last update he will ever post. Within days, Trey Sesler will step behind the camera for the final time. But this time, he won't be playing a character. He won't be shooting a skit. And the footage that follows, though never uploaded, will stain every frame he's ever filmed. In the vast sea of YouTube content, patterns are easy to miss, especially when they change slowly. A creator tweaks their format, tries something new, jokes get darker, backgrounds get messier, viewers chalk it up to personality, or burnout, or just evolution. But with Trey Eric Sesler, the changes weren't creative. They were cries for help, and no one answered. In the early years, Trey's channel was a quiet success. His reviews were long-winded but thoughtful. He had a soft spot for horror anime, series like Elfen Lied and Higurashi. He called them tragic masterpieces. Told his viewers they made him feel things most shows didn't. Looking back, that should have been a red flag, because for Trey, emotional connection often came through pain. His uploads started to include more than anime. He began experimenting with short films, low-budget thrillers featuring kidnappings, betrayals, violence. He cast friends and family as victims and villains. It was all in good fun, he said, but with every new upload, the violence got more realistic, more elaborate, more personal. In one video, Trey straps a stuffed animal to a homemade electric chair and films its execution. In another, he pretends to shoot a classmate in the head after losing a game. He laughed. Viewers laughed. No one took it seriously. They were just videos, weren't they? But then came the guns. Trey started collecting them in real life. Not props, not replicas. Real weapons, pistols, rifles, extended magazines. He showed them off on camera, sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with a kind of reverence. This one's for couch duty, he joked once, before unloading a round into a piece of living room furniture. Another time, he aimed an AR-15 across the street and said, "I could hit a person from here, not a deer, not a target, a person." One friend recalled a moment he heard that. He went home, told his wife, "That boy's going to kill somebody one day." But he didn't call anyone. No one did. Trey's transformation continued. He got quieter in videos. His voice thinner, flatter, like he was rehearsing instead of speaking. And then there were the notes, the cryptic, ominous lines he began weaving into his monologues. In one video, "I've heard some rumors. There are people coming for me tonight." In another, "Some people aren't satisfied with Mr. Anime reviews." He says it calmly, staring into the lens, like it's a warning, or a dare. Fans thought it was a skit, maybe a teaser for a new film. They had no idea it was a reflection of something much darker. Paranoia, delusion, violent fantasies taking shape. And they were accelerating. Trey began referencing school shootings in his vlogs, commenting on the frequency of mass violence in the U.S. Not with concern, but with fascination. He studied the shooters, ranked their methods, assessed their weapons like a critic reviewing a film. "I looked at what worked," he told investigators later. "I graded the weapons. I wanted to know which ones were most effective." To Trey, it was all data. research. He wasn't inspired by these killers. He was preparing to outdo them. At 13, he once pulled a BB gun on a police officer. At 15, he told his brother he wanted to write a song called The Beast in My Head. At 22, that beast was fully awake. Trey started compiling a kill list. Not names, locations, strategies, timelines. He downloaded satellite images of schools in his hometown, marked entrances, timed lunch breaks. He had it all mapped out. He later admitted that his plan was to breach the junior high school during peak lunch hours, use an AR-15 with extended mags, open fire on the crowd. I had the firepower, he said. I had the timing. I had the motive. But not yet the moment. Trey was still holding back, not out of guilt, but because he wanted it to be perfect. He wanted to be remembered, not as Trey Sesler, not even as Mr. Anime, but as something else, something terrifying. His obsession with infamy consumed him. He studied mass murderers like serial killers studied anatomy. Bundy, Kinkle, Whitman, Brittles, Dahmer. He wasn't trying to understand them. He was trying to become them. In the quiet of his room, surrounded by notebooks and spent shell casings, he fantasized about what would feel like to take a life, then two, then more. But even as his fantasies sharpened, Trey maintained a front. He kept uploading, kept smiling for camera, kept pretending everything was fine. And in the final weeks before the tragedy, he even told his viewers some good news. He'd landed a job in film. "I'm doing some good stuff," he said, smiling. That video has since been lost, deleted, but the timeline is clear. Within days of posting it, Trey would drive home, load his weapons, and walk calmly into the house where he had filmed his earliest reviews. The same home where his family had laughed, watched movies, made dinner, and by the end of that night, that house would fall silent forever. There's a strange silence that hangs over places where violence has occurred. It's not the absence of sound. It's the weight of everything that used to fill the room. Laughter, footsteps, familiar voices. After it's gone, what's left is something colder. And inside the Sesler home in Waller, Texas, that silence had only just begun. March 20th, 2012. By the time police arrived at the small brick house on Far Street, something was already wrong. Neighbors hadn't seen the family in days. The school where Trey's father taught said he hadn't called in. The local newspaper, where his mother worked, got a vague message that she was out sick. It was unlike them. So officers conducted a welfare check. The garage door was partially open, just enough to see inside. It was the same cluttered garage that had served as a set for Trey's early videos. Old props, lighting rigs, pieces of fake bloodstained costumes. But this time, the stains weren't fake. Near the back wall, beneath a pile of junk and overturned shelves, officers found the first body, a woman in blood-soaked pajamas. Her body partially hidden under debris, her features barely recognizable. It was Rhonda Sesler, Trey's mother. She had been shot multiple times. Across the house, they found two more victims. In the hallway bathroom, curled into a twisted, unnatural position, was Mark, Trey's 26-year-old brother. Blood had pooled beneath his head, dried, congealed. He never had a chance. In the master bedroom, a man lay slumped over the bed, his legs hanging off the edge. His head was pressed into the pillow like he'd fallen asleep and never woken up. That was Trey's father, Lawton, a teacher, a quiet man, kind by all accounts. All three were shot. None had fought back. Nearly every room in the house showed signs of destruction. Furniture overturned, walls riddled with bullet holes, picture frames shattered, lights shot out, shell casings scattered like breadcrumbs across the floor. But it wasn't just the physical carnage that disturbed investigators. It was the message, spray painted in Trey's handwriting. Across the walls and doors were haunting lines. "I'll never forgive myself. God help me. I love my mom, dad, and brother. It wasn't just a confession. It was a eulogy, written by the killer himself. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random. This was personal. And it was planned. But where was Trey? That answer came quickly. He had driven to a friend's house, just a few miles away. A quiet guy named Casey, who had no idea his old buddy had just murdered his entire family. Trey stayed the night, slept on the couch, didn't say a word. By the time police surrounded the house the next evening, Casey was outside, confused, disoriented, trying to understand what was happening. Trey stood beside him, holding a Glock. He looked calm, blank. For a moment, it seemed like he might go down in a hail of bullets. But then, he dropped the gun into the grass and raised his hands. He was taken into custody without incident. Casey was too, though he was later cleared of any involvement. He had unknowingly shared a home with a mass murderer, and he would carry the trauma of that night forever. At the station, investigators sat across from Trey, expecting deflection, evasion, maybe even denial. Instead, he surprised them. He talked, calmly, clearly, in chilling detail. He explained everything. How he'd visited his family the night of March 18th. How a bullet accidentally discharged in his bedroom. How that mistake planted a thought in his head. They didn't hear it, he told detectives. So I knew I could fire a .22 in the house without anyone noticing. And once that realization set in, everything changed. He got drunk, left the house, returned later that night. Then, in the early morning hours of March 19th, he carried out the plan. Not all at once, not in a fit of rage. Methodically, first his mother, Rhonda. He lured her into the garage under the pretense of showing her damage to his car. She didn't suspect a thing. She didn't even scream. Then his brother, Mark, who intercepted him in the hallway. Trey walked past him silently, picked up his Glock, fired twice. Mark fled to the bathroom and locked the door. But it wasn't enough. Trey followed, kicked the door, shot through it, then returned with more firepower. His father, Lawton, had woken up by then, confused, groggy. Trey shot him too. Later, he told police that if anyone was going to hurt his family, it would be him. Not strangers, not outsiders. Him. And what he did next only deepened the horror. He reloaded, retraced the steps, and shot each of them again, this time with an AR-15 to make sure they were dead. His logic? I didn't want them suffering. He said it without emotion, as if compassion and carnage could somehow live in the same breath. Then, with all three family members lying dead in their home, Trey stayed. He didn't flee. He wandered through the house, started smashing things, shot at the TV, broke mirrors, knocked over shelves, left holes in the drywall. He trashed family photos, shot out windows away from the neighbors toward the woods. He said, I didn't want to hurt anybody else. But he did. He just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. Most murderers try to hide what they've done. They run. They burn evidence. They lie until their last breath. But Trey Eric Sesler didn't run. He stayed, not because he was sorry, not because he wanted to get caught, but because he didn't know what came next. The moment the last shot echoed through the halls of his childhood home, Trey didn't feel relief. He felt nothing, and that was almost worse. In his tape confession, Trey described it like waking up from a dream he didn't know he was having. The damage was done. The silence was real. And for the first time, he saw his actions with his own eyes. But still, he didn't call the police. He didn't try to end his life. He wandered the house, trashing everything he didn't shoot. He tore through closets, knocked furniture over, kicked holes in the walls, smashed light bulbs, turned his family's living space into a war zone. But it wasn't just chaos. There was a method to it. He shot out specific lights, shot through windows, but only toward the woods, not toward the neighbors. Even in this broken, spiraling state, Trey still had control. At least for now. He scrawled desperate messages across the walls in paint, in ink, in his own handwriting. I don't know why I did this. Please forgive me. God help me. I love them. It was part apology, part confession. But mostly it was legacy. Trey knew this scene would be discovered. He wanted it to tell a story. His story. But outside of that house, no one knew anything had happened. Not yet. No neighbors reported gunfire. No alarms. No screams. The house sat still. Just another quiet property in Waller, Texas, for almost 24 hours. In that time, Trey cleaned up what he could, not to cover his tracks, but to regain some sense of control. He gathered weapons, ammunition, clothes, loaded them into his black Mustang. Then, casually, he called his parents' employers. He told the school his father was sick, told the local paper his mother had come down with something. There was no emotion in the calls, just enough detail to buy himself time. And then he drove to Waller Junior High School, not to teach, not to volunteer, to kill. In his confession, Trey laid out the entire plan. He had studied the school for months, knew the layout, the gates, the timing of lunch periods, how many kids were outside at 2:45 p.m. He had even saved satellite images of the property on his laptop. The plan was simple. Drive in, park, grab the AR-15 from a backseat, unload, shoot until the police came, then die. That was the end game. And he almost did it. Trey sat in the school's parking lot that Tuesday afternoon. He watched the students flood out into the courtyard. Hundreds of them. He cracked open a beer. He said, "There's my opportunity." The rifle was loaded. The ammo was ready. But he didn't move. He watched them, then drove away. Later, detectives would ask him why. His answer was chilling. Maybe it was because what happened at my house was too real. Maybe I just didn't have it in me anymore. Or maybe in that moment, he realized what true destruction looked like. And even he can go further. Trey drove to Casey's house next. An old friend. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. He told Casey he needed a place to crash. That he was between jobs. Tired. Just needed a day to breathe. Casey let him in. Let him sleep on the couch. Had no idea he was sleeping under the same roof as a mass murderer. And when police finally came, swarming the property with guns drawn and helicopters circling overhead, Casey stood outside confused, staring at his own face on the news. They said something about Trey, he told reporters later. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know where he went. What he didn't know was that Trey had walked outside with him, armed. His Glock was in his hand, loaded, chambered, and for a moment, he considered it. He could shoot, could die, could take Casey with him. But again, he didn't. He looked over at Casey, then lowered the gun, dropped in the grass, and surrendered. Trey wasn't done talking, though, once in custody. He requested to speak with detectives again, not to plead for mercy, not to beg for help, but to clarify the timeline. I saw in a news article that y'all were confused about what day it happened, he told them. I have a clear picture. And he did, minute by minute, action by action, bullet by bullet, no remorse, no hesitation, only detail. The kind that could only come from someone who had lived it out in their head long before it ever happened. But there was still one question no one could answer. Why? Why murder his entire family? Why walk into that house and turn it into a slaughterhouse? Why come so close to a school shooting that could have been one of the deadliest in Texas history? Trey didn't offer a clear answer. He didn't blame his parents, didn't blame anime, didn't blame YouTube. He just said they were the first people he saw, and he needed a release. I never fantasized about killing them, he said. It wasn't even premeditated until an hour before it happened. But that wasn't true, because deep in Trey's files on a laptop hidden under his bed, detectives found something else. A research paper, titled simply, Serial Killers. Inside, he had ranked mass murders by weapon, method, and casualty count. He created a scoring system, rated the effectiveness of different firearms, studied how long each killer lasted before being caught or killed. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't academic. It was a blueprint, and Trey had followed it, step by step. By the time authorities processed the blood-soaked house on Far Street, the smell of gunpowder still lingered, but the horror they stepped into was beyond anything they were prepared for. In the garage, they found Rhonda Sesler, 57 years old, still in her pajamas, collapsed beneath a scatter of old tools and dusty furniture, half covered, as if someone had tried to bury her, then changed their mind. The same garage where Trey had once filmed skits with her. The same woman who once wore Halloween masks in his short films and called him her little director. Shot, left to bleed out in the very set they created together. Inside the house, the trail grew darker. In the hallway bathroom, where Trey once filmed a mock suspense film, officers discovered 26-year-old Mark Sesler. The blood on the tile had dried into the grout. There were multiple gunshot wounds. The door had been kicked in, a deadbolt blown out, and across from it, bullet holes splintered the frame. Mark had tried to hide, tried to survive. He didn't stand a chance. In the master bedroom, authorities found the father, Latan Sesler, face down on the mattress, legs hanging off the bed. He hadn't even had time to fully stand. Trey shot him while he was still waking up. The position of his body suggested confusion, not fear, as if, in his final moments, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. His own son, holding a weapon, firing without hesitation. Trey later admitted he walked back through the house to make sure none of them were suffering. He reloaded and shot each of them again. This wasn't rage. This wasn't impulsive. This was methodical, clinical, almost practiced. But the humans weren't the only victims. Trey's family had kept birds, 2 little finches, locked in a small cage. Trey shot them. He found his ferret, a pet he had once doted on in his videos. He shot it too. Even the family's fish didn't survive. A single round from Trey's Glock shattered the 20-gallon tank in his room, sending water flooding the carpet and leaving the creature gasping. The walls of the house weren't just smeared with blood. They were marked with Trey's messages, not written in panic, not rushed. He took his time. I love you all. God help me. I don't know why I did this. But he did know. He always knew. Trey had spent years cultivating a persona, Mr. Anime. Online, he was eccentric, quirky, creative. But behind that mask, a fascination with death had taken root, a seed planted long before the murders. And now it had bloomed. When detectives questioned friends, neighbors, even childhood classmates, they all said the same thing. We saw the signs. He was obsessed with guns. He joked about school shootings. He once told me he could kill a crowd in seconds. A former classmate recalled the day Trey showed him a Japanese sniper rifle with an extended clip. He pointed across the street. The man told police and said, I could hit a person from here. Not a deer, not a target, a person. Another friend remembered when Trey suggested a song title during band practice. The Beast in My Head, he called it. Back then, it was weird, maybe darkly artistic. Now, it sounded like a cry for help no one understood. Even animals weren't safe around him. Stories began surfacing. A kitten shot with a buckshot round. A rabbit disappeared from its cage without a trace. A Doberman strapped into a passenger seat like a human before being driven out to the woods and killed with a .22. And worst of all, he confessed to every detail, with no remorse. Just facts. I don't know why I did it, Trey told investigators. I can't even say to this day why. But then he did say why. In one chilling statement, He laid it bare. I studied mass murderers. I graded them on how effective their weapons were. I wanted to be one. He wasn't inspired by anime. He was inspired by evil. He named them Ted Bundy, Kip Kinkle, Charles Whitman, Jeffrey Dahmer. He scored their tactics, their body counts, their mistakes, and then he tried to do better. The only thing that stopped him, he didn't get that far. Yet, the murders were only part of the plan. In Trey's words, they were Phase 1. Phase 2 was supposed to be the school, Waller Junior High. That's where his rage was supposed to peak. He'd drawn up diagrams, mapped entrances, listed weapon types, calculated casualty potential. And in his files, detectives found something even more disturbing, a list of modifications he planned to make to his weapons. He was trying to optimize the kill count, all while posting YouTube videos about Dragon Ball Z and film school applications. In one infamous upload, he said, "Yu-Gi-Oh! Was so bad in my mind, I just want to kill somebody." At the time, it was brushed off. Now it was a prelude, a warning, one that no one took seriously, until it was too late. By March 18, 2012, the day Trey Sesler murdered his family, the world still saw Mr. Anime, a strange but seemingly harmless YouTuber, a kid with a camera, some toy guns, and a love for Japanese animation. But what no one realized, not his viewers, not his friends, not even his parents, was that the man behind the screen had crossed a line long ago. In one of his final YouTube videos, Trey looked straight into the camera and smiled. "This is just an update video to let you guys know that I'm going to reward myself with a 2 or 3 week break." He called it a vacation. He thanked his fans, told them how great things were going. But behind that smile, something was unraveling. He'd already made up his mind. This was his farewell message. He just didn't say it out loud. And then silence. The next video never came, because less than a week later, Trey drove back to Waller, back to the house he grew up in. He parked in the garage. His mother was still awake. She asked where he'd been. He told her to come look at the damage on his car bumper. She followed him out to the garage. She never made it back. Trey later confessed to picking up his .22 rifle, loaded with full metal jacket rounds. "She started to say something," he said, "but she didn't finish the sentence. I just turned and fired." He shot her 4 times, point blank, no warning, no argument, just silence and gunfire. Then he stepped back inside. His brother Mark was in the hallway. Mark heard the shots. He looked confused. "What was that?" he asked. "What are you doing out there?" Trey didn't answer. He walked past him into his room, picked up his Glock 9mm, came back into the hall, and shot his brother twice. Mark fled to the bathroom, slammed the door, locked it. Trey tried to kick it down. When that failed, he shot through it 5, maybe 6 times. Then he reloaded and blasted out the deadbolt. Mark was on the floor, bleeding, unconscious, or already dead. Trey stood over his body, then left. In the master bedroom, his father Utan had just started to wake up. He'd heard the shots, but didn't understand them. Trey entered quietly, fired twice. Utan slumped over, his head in the pillow. Trey flipped on the light, looked at him. There was a wound in his neck, he recalled. It didn't even register for him. He was half asleep. Then Trey left the room. But it wasn't over. Not yet, because, in his words, he didn't want anyone to suffer. So he walked back through the house, room by room. This time with his AR-15, he shot his mother again, his brother again, his father again, to make sure. "I wanted to make sure it was done," Trey told detectives. "I didn't want them laying there moaning for hours." Then, as the adrenaline faded, reality crept in, and so did madness. Trey began destroying the house. He flipped bookshelves, smashed picture frames, shot out the light fixtures and TVs, blasted holes in the drywall. "It was like I was in a trance," he said. "I just couldn't look at anything without seeing what I'd done. Then he turned on the animals, the birds, the ferret, the fish tank. He shot them all. Even the family's fish, trapped in a 20-gallon tank, were executed. When asked why, Trey said nothing, just shrugged, and then he sat down beside his mother's body in the garage. For how long? No one knows. He couldn't remember. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But when he stood up again, he wasn't finished. He picked up a Sharpie, walked back inside, and began writing on the walls. I'll never forgive myself. God help me. I don't know why I did this. I love my mom, dad, and brother. The words didn't match the crime. They weren't an apology. They were echoes, aftershocks of something deeper, something broken. Trey called his parents' workplaces and left voicemails claiming they were sick. Then he loaded his Mustang with guns, ammunition, and a case of beer and drove away. But he wasn't fleeing. He was heading to Phase 2, Waller Junior High. He pulled into the parking lot around 2:45 p.m. He sat there, watched the kids come out for lunch, watched them laugh, joke, run to their buses. In the back seat was his AR-15, loaded. Next to it were 150 rounds of ammunition. Everything was ready. Everything. That was my moment, Trey later said. That was my opportunity. And I didn't take it. Why? He said he didn't know. He said maybe it was because what happened in the house felt too real. Or maybe the fantasy didn't survive reality. He just sat there, drinking his beer, watching children walk past the edge of annihilation, and doing nothing. Then he left. No one in that parking lot knew how close they'd come to death. Not that day. Not until much later. Trey drove to his friend Casey's house, stayed the night, played video games, watched TV. He said nothing. And Casey never suspected a thing. Not until the next day, when helicopters circled overhead and police surrounded the house. Trey walked out the front door, Glock in hand. He looked around, saw the guns, the vests, the shouting, and Casey standing beside him. And for the first time in 2 days, he hesitated. If I shoot, we both die, he thought. There's no need for anyone else to get hurt. So he dropped the Glock into the grass and raised his hands. The rampage was finally over. But the story was far from finished, because now Trey would speak, and what he revealed next would be worse than anyone imagined. By now, the walls of the interrogation room had heard everything. The confession, the timeline, the plan that almost was. But in the days after Trey Eric Sesler was arrested, one voice broke to the weight of all the horror. A voice that wasn't cold, calculating, or forensic. It was a voice of quiet devastation. It belonged to a grandmother. On March 21st, 2012, just 1 day after the arrest, Trey was granted a phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a friend, but to the only person who might still answer, his grandmother. She had just lost her son, Trey's father, her daughter-in-law, and her grandson, Mark. And now, the boy she once cradled in her arms was sitting in jail for killing them all. Trey's voice on the call was subdued, uncharacteristically soft. "I don't know, Grandma," he whispered. "I just wanted to apologize." There was a pause. The weight of his words sat heavy on the line. His grandmother, choking back grief, said something unexpected. Not denial, not fury, but faith. "If you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and are really sincere," she said, "God will forgive you." Forgiveness. After everything. Even Trey was stunned into silence. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. He sounded like a child again. Lost. Disconnected. She told him she knew he loved his father. And Trey didn't hesitate. "I did," he replied. "I love my dad." The emotion in his voice cracked, just for a moment. But the call wasn't just for reconciliation. It was a reminder. "It blew us away what you did," she said gently. "We don't understand it, but we still love you." A pause again. long, hollow. "My whole family is dead," Trey finally said. "I'm so sorry." It was one of the few times he sounded sincere, not rehearsed, not clinical, just broken. But even then, even as he expressed sorrow, there was no explanation, no attempt to grapple with the enormity of what he had done. There was only absence. One person missing, then two, then three, and a void he could not fill with reason. But it was another call, weeks later, that left the most chilling impression. April 8th, 2012, Easter Sunday. His Aunt Liz visited Trey in jail. She had known him since birth, watched him grow up, watched him twist. And when she arrived, Trey greeted her with something disturbingly sweet. "Aunt Liz, I don't want you to be disappointed in me." It was the kind of thing a child might say after getting a bad grade in school. But this wasn't school. This was capital murder. Before she could respond, Trey continued, and this time his voice changed. "I just want you to know," he said, "they didn't suffer." His tone had dropped, deeper, icy. Not a plea for forgiveness, not an apology, a statement. Flat, controlled, final. Liz later said the shift in his voice haunted her. One moment, he was soft-spoken Trey. The next, something else entirely. "I made sure of that." And just like that, the room went cold. It was a line that sounded like a mercy. But it wasn't. It was control, his last act of dominance over the people he claimed to love. In the weeks that followed, Trey wrote several letters. Some were addressed to relatives. Others, strangely, were never sent. But one thing was consistent. He never once expressed regret in a way that matched the horror of his crimes. He spoke of loneliness, of fear, of obsession, but not remorse. He said he missed his mother's laugh. He said he kept thinking about his brother's smile. He said the silence in his head had grown louder, but he never said the words everyone hoped to hear. "I wish I hadn't done it." Instead, he talked about legacy, infamy. He worried more about how he would be remembered than who he had erased. And this, perhaps more than anything, defined Trey Sesler, a man who once said he wanted to become famous for something great, and chose the darkest possible path instead. His YouTube channel, Lindcap Productions, remained live for 8 more years. No new content, just the old videos, the anime reviews, the short films, the laughter, frozen in time. And underneath every clip, comments from viewers stunned by the split between who he seemed to be and who he really was. How did we not see it? He was warning us. This guy was pure evil. The truth, though, isn't that he hid it well. It's that we didn't want to look. Even when he titled a video, "Mr. Anime is planning something." Even when his voice became darker, his eyes more distant, his jokes more violent, people just chalked it up to internet weirdness. They thought it was part of the act. They didn't know it was the rehearsal. Trey's story isn't just about a triple murder. It's about silence. The silence of friends. The silence of viewers. The silence of a system that never stepped in. Until it was too late. And one final silence. The one that fell over Waller, Texas, when a mother, a father, and a brother were buried in the same ground. Killed not by a stranger, but by the boy they raised. In Texas, capital murder typically leads to one destination: a trial, a public reckoning, a chance for the evidence to be laid bare, for a jury to hear every agonizing detail, and for a defendant to face the ultimate judgment. But in the case of Trey Eric Sesler, the courtroom doors never opened. There would be no jury, no witness stand, no testimony, no defense strategy, no arguments. Because before the trial could begin, Trey made a decision. He pled guilty. All 3 counts. Capital murder. It was a move that stunned even the prosecution. This was a case poised to draw national media attention. A YouTube star turned killer with plans of mass violence. It had all the ingredients of a media circus. But Trey didn't want the spotlight anymore. Or perhaps He wanted to control the narrative one last time. His plea deal guaranteed him a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. No appeals, no chance at release, just the rest of his life inside a concrete cell. Some speculated he did it to spare his remaining family members the pain of a trial. Others believe it was part of a quiet calculation, one last performance, ending not in fire but in silence. The courtroom on August 2nd, 2012, was somber. There were no cameras, no outbursts, only the sound of paperwork being shuffled and the solemn pronouncement of the court. Trey Eric Sesler, sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Just like that, the case was closed. There was no justice to be fought over, no cross-examination, just a quiet vanishing of a young man whose face had once been known across anime forums and YouTube comment sections. A face now known for something else entirely. Behind closed doors, the families mourned. The few who remained behind were left with scars that would never close. His grandmother, his aunt, his cousins. They buried 3 loved ones and watched the 4th, Trey, disappear behind bars. But despite the plea, questions still loomed. What drove him? Was it untreated mental illness? A lust for violence? A desperate cry for fame? Trey never offered a satisfying answer. During his confession, he dismissed the idea that he had planned the murders well in advance. It was maybe an hour before. 30 minutes tops, he told detectives. But how do you explain the stockpile of weapons? The written timelines? The saved satellite images of schools? The serial killer research? The interviews with detectives hinted at something far more premeditated, something years in the making. But with the guilty plea came an end to official inquiry. No psychiatric evaluation was made public. No expert testimony ever delivered. And so the case, like Trey, was sealed away. But while the courtroom went quiet, the internet didn't. Reddit threads lit up. Comment sections flooded. True crime forums dissected every frame of Trey's videos. Some users saw it as a warning, a modern parable of how isolation, obsession, and untreated violence can fester under the surface. Others were fixated by the details. They combed through his videos for hidden messages, clues, predictions, moments where the mask seemed to slip. He looks off here. Did you see how he smiled when he mentioned death? That wasn't acting. For some, Lindcap Productions became a dark rabbit hole, one that blurred the lines between fiction and horror, until they were indistinguishable. And for a while, it remained online. 8 years after murders, Trey's YouTube channel was still up, still garnering views, still receiving comments. People called it a digital crime scene, a chilling time capsule of a mind in descent. In 2020, YouTube quietly removed the channel. No statement, no public announcement, just gone, but not forgotten. Copies of the videos still circulate, fragments on obscure sites and archive channels. Whispers of persona he once cultivated, Mr. Anime, a young man who once dreamed of directing horror movies and ended up becoming the very subject of one. After his sentencing, Trey was transferred to the CT Terror Unit in Rosharon, Texas, a maximum security prison housing some of the state's most notorious offenders. There, he began serving his life sentence. No camera, no internet, no stage, just concrete walls, steel bars, and time. Endless time. Fellow inmates reportedly gave him the same nickname the world once did, Mr. Anime. But no one called him that to his face. He kept to himself, read books, wrote in journals, and declined every media request. Truth is the Sesler murders weren't just a family tragedy. They were a near miss, a brush with something far worse. And if not for a series of spontaneous hesitations, if not for a few split-second decisions, if not for the presence of someone else in the wrong place at the right time, the headline might have been very different. Massacre at Waller Junior High. Some crimes end with the last bullet. Others echo for decades. Trey Eric Sesler didn't just leave behind a crime scene. He left behind a blueprint, not just for what happened, but for what could have. His house in Waller, Texas, once just another quiet suburban home, became a museum of red flags and hindsight. Bloodstains, bullet holes, overturned furniture, and scribbled confessions on the wall. "I'll never forgive myself," he wrote. "God help me." But those words came after. The warnings, they came before. For 6 years, the internet had front row seats to the slow unraveling of a disturbed mind. And no one, not viewers, not YouTube, not even those closest to him, knew what they were truly witnessing. Or worse, they did and didn't act. His videos weren't just entertainment. They were symptoms, a shifting tone, a darker script, a growing obsession with weapons, violence, and death masked in the guise of art and reviews. Yu-Gi-Oh was so bad in my mind, he once said, "I just want to kill somebody." Most shrugged it off as hyperbole. But what if it wasn't? What if that line was more confession than critique? Trey's content blurred the line between fantasy and reality until one bled into the other, literally. And by the time anyone realized it, it was too late. 3 members of his family gone, a school nearly attacked, an arsenal prepared, and a world still catching up to the horrifying truth. The warning signs have been there all along. People asked, why didn't someone do something? But who? His viewers? Most were teenagers. Many thought it was all a bit. His friends? They saw the guns. They heard the jokes. But Trey was charismatic, polite, smart. His teachers? No official red flags. Law enforcement? That BB gun incident with the police when he was 13, it was dropped. The system failed to flag him, and Trey became invisible until he wasn't. Until the night he painted the walls of his childhood home with a family's blood. And still, the most haunting part of Trey Sesler's story isn't what he did. It's what he almost did. We now know Trey had plans, deep, disturbing, and disturbingly detailed. He studied mass murderers like Ted Bundy, David Berkowitz, and Charles Whitman. He rated their methods, ranked their weapons, and critiqued their tactics like they were game stats. He downloaded satellite images of schools, plotted breach points, timelines, ammo loads. One of his notebooks even had a crude sketch of Waller Junior High, his former school, and notes scrawled beside it. Lunch rush, most dense time, fast strike, maximize. In his confession, he admitted it outright. I sat outside the school with the AR-15 and 150 rounds, and I watched the kids flood out, and I thought, now's the time. But he didn't do it. Why? Even Trey didn't fully know. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe the reality of what he'd already done finally broke through his delusions. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd already scratched the itch, and what followed was a hollow echo of what he thought killing would feel like. He confessed not long after, turned himself in without incident, and even during his interrogation, he didn't lie or avoid. He spoke in chilling, lucid detail. But remorse? That was harder to find. When asked why he killed his family, he said, "They were the only immediate human targets in my sight. Not rage, not hatred, just opportunity." That's what haunted investigators. There was no argument, no fight, no moment of snap control, just quiet, calculated murder. And that's what makes Trey Sesler's story so terrifying. Not because he was evil in the traditional sense, but because he wasn't. He was normal on the surface. Funny, creative, intelligent. He made videos people loved. He talked to fans. He laughed with friends. He even thanked God and asked for prayers when he was sick. And yet, underneath, something rotten had been festering for years. Some call him a monster. Others call him a tragedy. But all agree his story is a warning. A reminder that the next killer might not be wearing a mask or lurking in alleyways. They might be smiling in a YouTube thumbnail, cracking jokes about anime, asking for likes and subscribers. The violence, when it finally comes, isn't always from the shadows. Sometimes it's uploaded in 720p. Trey Eric Sesler is now in his 40s. He will never be released. He will never make another video. He will never hold another camera or a gun. But the impact of what he did, the trail he left behind, still reverberates across the digital world. His videos became viral warnings. His story, dissected by true crime communities and mental health advocates alike. A symbol of something broken, in him, in the system, in us, and in the end, the most chilling detail might not be the bloodshed, but how close we came to something even worse. Because sometimes, the scariest horror stories are the ones that almost happened